They're dead, Dave.
What, Captain Hollister?
Everybody's dead, Dave.
What, Todd Hunter? What, Selby? Not Jen?
He's dead, Dave. Everybody is dead. Everybody is dead, Dave.
Hello, welcome back to Everybody is Dead Dave, the Red Dwarf review podcast, where we're working our way through every episode of the series from the end to the beginning and beyond. And we're starting series 10 finally.
Yay.
After much delay. We've had some specials. We've covered things like comics, we've covered things like novels and audio series that predate Red Dwarf, but now we're actually going to start the Dave era.
It's time. Finally.
It is time. I'm Phil. If you haven't listened before, I am the long-term out of the two of us that are regular presenters on the show. I'm the long-term fan, and we have our relative newbie, Adam Martyn.
That's me. Always the relative newbie.
And of course, we like to have an occasional guest reviewer on the show as well. And today we have the other half of the Review of Death podcast, the Doctor Who review podcast. We've had Billy Garrett John on before. We've now got the other half of that podcast, Matthew Toffolo. Hello, Matthew.
Welcome.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I think I discovered that Billy was a Red Dwarf fan. Just randomly, he had a picture of his bookshelves on Twitter, and I noticed all the DVDs on there. So I was like, right, we've got to get Billy on the podcast. And then I think I was listening to a review of Death, and you kept on mentioning Red Dwarf as well. So I was like, oh, Matt's a fan too. I've got to get him on as well.
Since I was a kid, growing up in the 90s, it was just Doctor Who and Red Dwarf on VHS. It was just part and parcel.
So what was your first episode? Can you remember?
Oh God,
first series if you can't remember the specific episode.
It was probably Series 5. I have strong memories of us having the Series 5 videos. So I would have watched those a lot. And then I can remember going to W.H. Smith's and buying the special edition version of Series 3, or the latter half. So that was Time Slides and the Body Swap one, with the new effects and stuff. And that was a bit weird. That was a weird time. I didn't know they existed until we picked it up and then brought it home. I was like, oh, this isn't how it was when it aired, surely.
And have you've been watching it ever since? Have you been keeping up with all the new ones, all the Dave era ones and everything?
Yeah. I can remember Series 7 being on. I remember my brother taping them. And I can remember vividly watching the first episode of Series 8 when that aired. And then, I was over the moon when they brought it back, because I was, it ended on a cliffhanger in Series 8.
Yeah.
And that was it. It was like, oh, that's it. No more Red Dwarf.
10 years of waiting to find out what would happen next. Yeah. I had a similar thing. Because were you watching when Series 6 aired? Were you watching it then?
I wasn't watching it then. I think it might have... Well, I was probably a bit too young then, but we did have some of those episodes taped on VHS that my brother had taped. So I do remember the last episode of Series 6. And it was really annoying because on our recording, for some reason, I don't know what happened. This is my brother's terrible taping. It cut out the middle. So all of a sudden, when all the future versions of the Red Dwarf characters appear, that explanation was all missing from the recording. So when you watched it back, it was like, wait, what has happened? Yeah, it was really weird. I was like, oh no, what? But thankfully, with the DVDs, it finally answered those questions for me.
Yeah,
those were the days, eh? If anyone's listening who never had to deal with VHS tapes, and it was an art form, wasn't it? You had to get good at it, like taping and cutting off at the right points and all that. Yeah.
And especially if you were like one of those people who like to cut out the adverts as well. You had to make sure you get it at the right time.
Yes, I just left them in. Safer option.
Yeah, true.
Other one, Red Dwarf, BBC, you wouldn't have had that, so that wouldn't have been too bad, at least. Yeah. So today we're talking about the first episode of Series 10, Trojan. This is the first episode that aired after Back to Earth. I think there was a couple of years. I think Back to Earth was 2009. This was 2012, I think it was. So there was a few years gap there. But we're back, and it kind of starts off in a new room we haven't seen before on Red Dwarf. I guess this is now the control room that they're using. They seem to I'm assuming that you can control the ship from multiple rooms. That's my headcanon on Red Dwarf. It's a big ship.
It's big enough, yeah.
One thing I've noticed straight off the bat with this series is that they've clearly decided that because it's Red Dwarf, all the sets now need to be red.
Yes.
Yeah, it's quite a... at first I thought, I was like, is it a rustic look? Are we going for it? But then as it went on, I was like, no, it's just red.
It's a red industrial look, isn't it, now that they've gone for like pretty much all of the sets on Red Dwarf. They got it in the new bunk as well. What do you think about this compared to the kind of... We've had the military grey from the really early years. We've had the kind of more white aesthetic of the middle era. What do you think of this one?
I mean, I like that like white creamy version. That was sort of like the era that I remember watching the most, particularly more so than the military grey. But I think this is quite nice. I think this works quite well, especially in HD and stuff. I think it looks good on the modern cameras.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think a lot of the sets in this episode in particular, I mean, when we get to it, but when they go to the Cornelius 3, like all the sets in this episode I thought they felt very vast and very exciting. Not that sets in Red Dwarf haven't been vast and exciting, but like you say, HD cameras, it just looks a lot nicer.
Yep. We start with Lister watching some racing on the screen. It turns out to be pig racing. He's getting very enthusiastic about the pig racing. Doing jockey movements and everything. I like that. That was good. And he's found a book that he's found in Peterson's quarters. He's still rifling through his old friend's quarters 20 odd years later. Still hasn't found everything, clearly. I mean, it's a big ship, but they're his best friends from when he was alive. You'd think he would have thoroughly gone through the stuff by now, but he's still discovering new stuff. And it's a book about... Well, what's the title of it? I can't remember what the title was. But...
Is it Stupid Things You Won't Believe Happened?
Yeah.
Yes,
like that.
Yeah. And it's there's a bizarre fact that comes out that most people in car accidents, is it specifically in
in
Norway?
1971, I think.
1971
in Sweden.
In Sweden.
That most car accidents involve a moose.
Yeah.
A moose is the cause of most car accidents, yeah.
That's it, yeah. Yeah, I liked this bit, and then Kat got some nice interactions with this. I thought Kat did quite well out of this episode, to be honest. And one thing we've said before is that he sometimes lacks. He kind of comes in for a couple of punchlines, and that's about it. And there's not much for him to do. Yeah, I thought he had quite a bit to do.
Yeah, it felt more rounded this time, because I think I don't know what you reckon, Matt, but like in those like series 5, 6, 7, 8, it sort of feels like the episodes can be like, oh, it's all about Lister, it's all about Rimmer, or even all about Crichton, but it very rarely felt like it was all about Kat. So it's nice that it feels, well, to me at least, it feels a bit more rounded in this episode, like between all four of them a little bit. Obviously, Rimmer's got more focus, but Kat just doesn't feel like the punchline bag in this one.
No, I completely agree. I think he's got far more to do compared to some episodes. And one of the things that struck me, because I haven't watched this series for quite a while, watching it back, I was like, my God, Kat hasn't aged at all compared to like any of the other guys. He's like, he hasn't aged at all. It's amazing.
Yeah. It is crazy. And it's crazy to think this series now is 10 years ago. It's insane that they've been running on Dave now for 10 years and only got out 3 series and a special in that time. But
there's a lot of like sort of throwbacks even in this first scene to like the earliest days of Red Dwarf, like, you know, Kat doing his like, wow, yeah, because like we've said before, he does that in like series 1 and 2, and then between
he never does
3,
it again, does he?
Yeah, he just stops doing it, and then all of a sudden, I think he did it a bit in Back to Earth as well. Can't remember if we talked about that, but yeah, it's just nice. I like those little Catisms, as we call them, and like Rimmer taking exams and things like. Do you know what I mean? I like the little throwbacks to the past, because it's, if you know it, then it's fun, because you're like, oh yeah, it's that. But then I feel if you were new to this, like new as in you'd never seen the old stuff, it's not, you're not going to get lost, I guess.
Yeah. I guess there's like, I mean, I guess it is character development, but there's a sense that in those middle series he becomes somewhat less cat-like and more just he's a vain character and a bit dim. So yeah, I like that. I like that they've obviously thought, right, okay, let's try and bring it back.
Yeah, that is good. And you said there, Adam, that he's they're doing callbacks and stuff. Rimmer's doing the astrophysics exam again. failing it again.
Again.
I like the fact that he's trying to make out that he's grown as a person and that he's cool. Whatever the results may be, he's fine with it.
Yeah.
And then he opens it and completely melts down and breaks down.
I sympathised a little bit. Not to, like, I remember in my A level, like, I'd done my English language all year, and you do like mock tests throughout the year, and there's basically, here's a tip for anyone doing English language A level. There's a pattern to it. If you nail what that pattern is, you'll get A star every time, right? You didn't hear this from me, but a bunch of us had nailed this pattern, and we were, A star, A star, A star. Did the exam, we were like, yeah, that was good. And then 2 days before results day, Ofsted changed the marking boundaries, and then I came out with an A. And obviously, like, that's still really good, and you shouldn't knock it. But so like Rimmer, you build yourself up to it, and then it's like, what? Excuse me? So I sort of sympathize. I mean, Chris Barry's like physical delivery, though, I think sold that for me. I know we've said it before. There are some jokes in Red Dwarf for me, at least, that don't land as well sometimes, like just from like how they're written, but Chris Barry often salvages jokes like that for me with how he interprets it physically. And I think this is definitely one of those moments. Because that whole gag about, oh yeah, I'm ready, and then he's actually not ready, I feel that could have just fallen flat if not done like he does it. So what do you think, Matt, as like with Chris being like a physical actor?
I mean, Rimmer is my favourite character anyway. So, I mean, I am biased, but I mean, he's fantastic. And I remember when watching these episodes the first time round, initially, as good as they are, I initially sort of thought, oh, there's something not, it doesn't quite feel the same. The dynamic's not quite the same as it was back in the day. Perhaps that's because of the way it's filmed compared to how it was back in the 90s or whatever. And like you said, to do with the jokes as well, I think some of the jokes don't land as well in some of these more modern series as perhaps they might have done back in the old days. But I completely agree. I think, Chris Barry is just so good. He is able to just salvage those things that could otherwise be a little awkward. And like, I think sometimes, especially in this episode, there were a few gags with Lister that I was like, that doesn't quite really hit the spot as it probably should do. And I don't know if that's just because maybe it's because it's been so many years since they've done it. And, perhaps they're not quite in the rhythm of doing it as they used to be. But yeah, I think, Chris Barry's just such a pro. He's just brilliant.
He is.
Next, we get a scene where it's Lister and Kat are watching. Well, they get interrupted. Their whatever there's on the screen gets interrupted with a shopping channel broadcast, an Android shopping channel broadcast, and they start off kind of slagging it off, going, "Oh, who listens to this rubbish?" But by the end of it, they're like, "We need this Stirmaster," and then Lister especially really wants it, and he's on the phone trying to order it. I quite like the send up of the shopping channels here.
Yeah.
Have
we ever been suckered? I was about to ask the same question. Have we ever been
suckered in by a shopping channel?
I think when I was a kid, because we never got it at home, we only had like terrestrial, but then on holiday, this is a sign of our age, isn't it? You know, when you went on holiday and wherever you stayed had like the Sky package and you had access to all these channels and you just flicked through and the shopping one was one of them. And they were probably, probably advertising like the latest Super Soaker, like something really daft like that. So, but no, thankfully as an adult, I have not succumbed to the delights of QVC, etc. So
no, me neither. I have to say, I've never been a QVC shopper.
Neither have I. But I think it's a very similar thing in terms of like useless gadgets that you kind of just see and go, "Oh, that'd be really cool," and buy it, and then you're like, "This is a bit rubbish" afterwards. Like in a very similar vein, I've bought a tea strainer. So it's tea bag strainer. It's like a little plunger thing that grips your tea bag and squeezes it for you, so it squeezes out all of the juice. It's just this little plastic thing. I think I bought it off Amazon, and it's one of those things that came up on Amazon. It was like £4. I was like, yeah, why not? That's it. And then it's sat in a drawer not being used. So I absolutely get the kind of, oh, this is a gadget that will save me energy or time, and then you never use it.
I guess it's like the modern equivalent is like the JVC products or whatever they are.
Oh,
You know that you see in Wilkinson's and places like that.
Yeah.
And it's just all these ridiculous things. Like there is a gadget for every possible conceivable thing, no matter how mundane. But I think it's a good gag. It's a really good gag. And the fact that it continues throughout the whole episode and has a good payoff as well.
Yeah, because he keeps he's on hold for the whole episode, basically, Mister trying to get this Stairmaster, and like you said, there's a payoff at the end which we'll come to. But before that, what they find a derelict ship that they go over to investigate, and we find out that Rimmer's brothers. This is a Space Corps ship. We know. I think we might have known this already from previous episodes, but his brother's served in the Space Corps, and he mentions that again here. And he's of course, very jealous of his brothers. Like his brothers, they bullied him as a kid. We've heard that mentioned, of course, another nice callback. And we get kind of like him talking about his brothers and stuff. What do you think about their kind of relation, how they set up the relationship with his brothers here?
I mean, I think you're right. I think from previous series, they do make reference to the fact that his brothers were in the Space Corps and that he's the failure, isn't he? So it's nice that they very quickly summarize that if you're new to the show. And I remember, I think at the time, this was quite a big deal that they were bringing one of his brothers into it, because I don't think have we ever seen his brothers?
I think only in flashbacks, because we'd seen him as a kid getting bullied, I think. And
but not as adults.
I think there was something in the Time Slides episode where you might have seen one of them chastise him or something like that. Or
maybe. I can't remember now.
Yeah.
But I can see. I mean, to add credence to, what you just said, Matt. Like when they said it was his brother and they were coming aboard, I felt like it was a big deal. I was like, whoa, okay, like we haven't seen this before. So yeah, I think it was a good, especially for the opener of a new series as well. I think it's a good thing to latch onto.
Yeah. Then we get this sort of plot convenient device, which is this rod that makes
the quantum rod.
Quantum rod that brings parted stuff together. Or parted particles together, or something. There was some kind of techno-babble explanation which I didn't quite note down.
The MacGuffin.
Properly. And then immediately after fiddling with that and doing Rimmer does something that causes the power lights to go out. Then the ship receives a distress call, and it turns out the distress call is coming from another ship, and it's his brother, Howard. The implication being that the rod somehow brought his brother to him because they are particles that had been, I don't know. It was a bit vague. It was a bit kind of like hand wavy. Yeah. Oh yeah, this rod. I think there was a brief line going, oh yeah, the rod may have done this.
Yeah, Crichton says that, doesn't he? Yeah.
And then it's left at that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So we get, Lister's still on hold during all of this. He's taken the phone with him to the thing. So again, I like the fact that keeps on. We do get a nice Kachansky reference as well, because obviously she's not in it anymore. Who knows where she's gone?
I found it odd in a way, because obviously in Back to Earth they assert that I'm trying to remember now. She wasn't on the at the start of it. It's assumed she's gone, as it were, or there. And then I know you've said that this series might take place before Back to Earth or something.
I think it obviously takes place afterwards, but that's just my view of it. But it's because the ambiguity is on the box of Back to Earth. It says this takes place after Series 10, but Series 10 hadn't been made then, and that was kind of the meta explanation. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think it still takes place before.
I should, even though I'm still the relative new, I should have learnt by now not to examine Red Dwarf continuity all that deeply for the sake of my own sanity.
Yeah, we've said many times before that if you think Doctor Who continuity is a mess, Red Dwarf is. Red Dwarf doesn't care.
Yeah, Doctor Who at least tries on occasion, whereas Red Dwarf is like, forget about it.
Yeah. Rimmer wants to get to his brother in a slowest possible time so that he has time to complete the astronavigation exam and become an officer, so that he can not be such a failure in his brother's eyes and kind of not be as humiliated as he might be if his brother discovers he was a chicken soup vending machine repairman. So he's kind of they decide to go slowly in Red Dwarf rather than get there in the speediest possible time they could. I think Crichton says they could be there in minutes, but they decide to take 15 hours instead. There's a scene that I really like, which is Rimmer revising for the astronavigation exam again, and it's there's a question in there, and it's about Swedish cars in 1971, and of course Lister's ears prick up and goes,
right, so Swedish guy drives into a tree. What caused the accident? Answers in the back, right?
Right.
Wow, it's a really hard one there. I mean, you've probably got to be pretty damn smart to get a question like that right. You know what? I'm going to go for a moose.
A moose?
Yeah, it was in the road. He swerved to avoid the moose.
Are you insane? How can it be It's a moose.
And that would be funny enough by itself, but I think the way this joke builds is so good. Because then Crichton comes in. Rimmer is so flabbergasted that Lister got it. He's like,
Crichton, a lateral thinking question. Just got it myself. It's 1971. A Swedish man drives into a tree. What causes the accident?
It's a moose, sir. He swerves and hits a tree.
and then Cat comes in.
Yeah.
The
he's hedged his
stupidest one of the
bets,
lot.
doesn't he?
Yeah.
I've got something for you. A lateral thinking question. A lattery what? I knew I could rely on you. What caused this accident?
What accident?
It's a question, all right? Are you ready? It's 1971. A man...
Was he Swedish?
Yes.
A moose.
So it builds perfectly. I love that joke.
I thought it was brilliant, yeah.
And you have that lovely moment where, although Cat gets it right, he still ascertains as like, oh, but you know, the moose isn't driving the car.
Yes.
So you still get that backwards bit of like, okay, he's still dim, but he still doesn't quite get it. But
Yeah. No, it's just done. It's done great. I mean, my common recurrence on this show is saying that I think some comedy sequences go on for far too long, but this one just because it was sustained in such a great way. I didn't think that at all. I mean, it might be a spoiler for one of the categories later, but it's definitely the section of this episode I laughed at the most. So
yeah, and
I agree.
This all sends Rimmer into a sort of a bit of a tizzy and like an existential crisis. And he glitches and crashes. He had a bit of a glitch earlier when he was thinking about his brother. This time it completely crashes him. You get kind of like circle deaf eyes.
Oh, those famous pinwheels.
Yeah. It's like an Apple thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, and I see it all too
multicolored
often.
circle.
I see it all too often.
It is eyes.
But
Cat decides to draw a funny face on him, which we don't see, unfortunately. I would have liked to have seen what they drew.
Props to Chris Barry holding that facial pose, though, because that wouldn't have been easy. That sort of scrunched up, clenched teeth. Like, all the time we see it on camera, he seems to be holding it as still as possible.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I assume they didn't do some kind of trickery to freeze him there. But they do clear him out. They fix him by draining his resentment. So they do kind of fix him, and he feels slightly better. For the briefest moments, but then he starts to recount the bullying again and stuff. I really liked the line where Lister's trying to get it. Now he's been drained of the resentment. He's like,
But now you've got a choice. Are you going to grow up and let him see you for who you really are? Or are you going to carry on being a lying, cheating weasel, pretending to be something you're not?
I think we all know the answer to this.
And it's true.
Rimmer doesn't change.
No.
We wouldn't want him to.
No,
Absolutely not. He's the smeghead we love to hate.
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So instead, he decides to get them all in on the deceit, and they all pretend to be the crew of this salvaged Space Corps ship that they found, including rather wonderful Star Trek-like uniforms.
Yeah, like next-gen uniforms.
It's kind of like with the kind of top that's a slightly different shade to the bottom bit, and it's got these funky badges and stuff. Space Corps uniforms. Because the Howard is also wearing one when it comes over, so it must be the general school thing. He beams over with someone who I was like, for a while, I was wondering who this other woman was with him. I was like, oh, I thought you said the rest of the crew died. This human. Turns out she's a simulant.
Yeah, another nice little callback.
Yeah,
with the same voice effect as well.
Yes. I noticed that, and I like that. The fact that they went to that level of detail. I did confuse me to start with because I was like, oh, what? She's a simulant. Like, don't all the simulants want to kill humans? What's going on here?
Doesn't Howard have the best opener though when he comes in and Rimmer's like, yeah, you know, I'm the captain of this ship, and he goes, really? You were an absolute twat.
Yes.
It's not a line I expected, but again, the delivery and what I like about, I think is Mark Dexter, I think, is the actor who plays Howard. And just in general, what I like about him is he's similar enough to Chris Barry's Rimmer, but still also different, which I'm glad he wasn't just, because I did wonder how they were going to do it. I was like, is Chris Barry, like, you know, going to do it himself? Is he going to look slightly different? Or I'm glad it just wasn't like a one-to-one impersonation, I guess.
No, I agree. It's never explained why his older brother looks younger than him, though.
I don't think it is. They haven't got time to address that. But you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. It is odd, but I just think that sort of similar but different works so perfectly for this character.
That must be like really daunting thing to do. Be like, right, you know, this is the brother of such an iconic character, and you know, I have to make sure that I really pull it off, and I think he does. I think he does a really good job with it.
Absolutely, and it makes you wonder what his other, because does he say he has 3 brothers?
Yes, he does. Yeah.
Frank.
Frank.
To see them.
Yeah, Frank's definitely one, isn't? No, wasn't Frank the uncle?
Yes,
Uncle
I think
Frank,
it is his Uncle Frank. Yeah, because I've got an Uncle Frank, so whenever that's mentioned, it's always quite funny.
Yes, his Uncle Frank, who I think had a thing going on with his mum. I think.
Yes,
something.
Yes.
I guess one time when he came in, said something about being in a tent, and Uncle Frank came in, and he thought it was his mum or something like that.
Oh, that was his first kiss, wasn't it? Wasn't that his first kiss?
Yes, his first kiss was
like,
with Uncle Frank.
It was my Uncle Frank.
Oh, no.
You've got the wrong tent. You thought I was my mum.
One of the darker jokes of Red Dwarf.
Yes. But because Rimmer is pretending that he's a captain of this ship, the Howard kind of gets the resentment crash that Rimmer got earlier. So his eyes go all funny, and he just can't believe that happened. And when he comes out of it, he admits that actually he had such resentment because actually Howard is just a vending machine repairman.
Yes.
Still in the Space Corps, so still slightly better than working on a mining ship, but it basically has the same job as Rimmer.
So isn't it nice, isn't it, that after all these years, Rimmer finally feels like, oh, you know, it's I've got I'm one up. Well, potentially not really one up, but he feels like I've bettered you slightly.
Yes,
he's got his petty revenge that he always wanted. Yeah.
Yes, especially now his brother believes he's a captain as well because he's he's keeping that charade up. It turns out that the simulant did want to kill all humanity in the end.
That's right.
Because she killed the rest of Howard's crew, and Howard didn't obviously realize that, and now it is holding them hostage. Now, this is where the telephone on hold really comes into play, because throughout this whole episode, Liz has been on hold. He's had whole arguments, him, and there was a nice scene with him and Crichton where they both were like shouting down the phone at people.
Yeah.
He kept on passing.
I love that because we've all been there, haven't we?
Oh,
you wait for ages and then they delay you again, and you're like, I've got to keep calm, and you just again, one of the best moments is when Crichton. I mean, it's weird, isn't it? Because you can sort of predict what the joke's going to be, but it's still Robert
it's
Llewellyn
still good.
just when he's like, "Oh, I'm perfectly calm. I know how to do this," and then it just cuts to him going, "You listen here." Like it works so well. And yes, we've all been there. We try and stay calm, but it's just there's one. It's like, you know,
it wears you down.
I know, but do you know who's the worst for that? The bank. Just to get on a mini rant. When have you ever called the bank? Or like your bank, they give you that same tone each and every time. You just sit there, and then you get this automated thing saying, "Please tell me your sort code," and it's like, I don't recognize it. Oh, it's just tangent. It's don't ring the bank. Go to your local bank.
While we're on this tangent, the worst thing is when you've been on hold for about an hour and you finally get through to someone, a human, and they go, "Oh, I need to transfer you to this other place." And instead of transferring you, they cut it off.
Oh God, yeah, I have lost
And you
my
have to
mind
start
when
from
that
the
happens.
beginning again.
Like, mad respect to anyone who works in the call industry, but
Yeah.
it can be very frustrating.
Yes, very frustrating. They probably just pressed the wrong button. I'm assuming they didn't deliberately cut me off, or maybe they did. Who knows? But there we go. Mini rants over. Yes, so the simulant is holding them hostage, and that is when the phone, which is now on the other side of the room, but on speakerphone, actually, like, they can hear that it. Finally, the person goes, "Hello, how can I help you?" And Lister is like, "I am getting that phone. I don't care that you're holding your gun to me. I'm going across the room and getting that phone."
Yes.
And I don't blame him. After being on hold for so long, I think I would be the same.
Craig Charles sells that as well. Like,
Yeah.
just the
Does,
sheer
yeah.
desperation, the frustration. It just, it's great.
And in the end, because Kat is also walking around behind the simulant, not kind of like slightly oblivious until he realizes like what's going on here. So there's a whole scene where like loads of things come together, and Lister decides to go for the phone, and so the simulant starts shooting. Howard dives in front of Rimmer, saving his life and taking the hit of the blast and dying because it hits his light beam. I don't think we actually mentioned here that actually Howard is actually a hologram as well. I don't think we ever actually mentioned that. He is also a hologram of his ship. And so he dies because his light beam got hit and kind of has a deathbed kind of change of heart and mission and things, and it's like gotta, sorry, just generally like really heartfelt moment.
He apologizes, doesn't he, for being a bit of a shit brother, and then and he finally, he has his moment of bravery, because he'd admitted that he was a coward earlier on, that he hid under the table when the ship was under attack, and so it's like he finally feels worthy of the hero's death.
And of course Rimmer, given the opportunity to also confess and say, "I was a vending machine repairman too," and make his brother feel better in his moments of death, decides to not do that at all and say, instead, he kind of leads up to it. He says, "I've got something to confess to." And all he says is that, "Actually, I had one less fancy car than I said I had." Still pretends he's the captain, and his brother dies, thinking he's got one up.
And as you said earlier, Matt, would we have it any other way?
Yeah, no, it would have been too out of character for him to turn around to his brother and be like, "Oh no, Howard, I'm also I'm also a chicken soup repairman."
Yes.
Yeah. Of course, it does backfire on him slightly in the end, because once we're in our kind of final scene in Red Dwarf, back on the ship, we find out that I think it's the ship. Did they say the computer had, like, the Red Dwarf computer had given him the award?
Yes.
Couldn't remember where that came from, but they'd fed like the details of what had happened, the report, into the JMC computer or whatever, and
That's
it
right,
had posthumously given Howard the highest award for bravery. So that, of course,
and rename the ship.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah. To the SS Howard Rimmer.
Yes, I wonder if that's going to stick in the next episode. I somehow doubt it. But
No, given this show's very loose continuity, I highly doubt it. We'll probably see Howard again, and his death will never be mentioned.
But there's another nice little callback there, because Lister responds to that by saying, "I'll go get my brush."
Oh,
So that's a nice callback to him painting the ship in the titles.
Yes. I did, of course. Nice little bit there. Oh, and of course, the simulant is now in the quarters of Red Dwarf, being used as a tea stirrer.
Yes.
So we got his tea stirrer in the end.
Wouldn't be surprised if we never saw her again either.
No.
Yes, I would. Yeah.
Somehow got a small hunch. Hunch.
You can't be paying actors just to stand there and stir tea.
Oh goodness me, no! The travesty.
Although they suppose they could have just had a shot of a hand every episode stirring some tea just in the background, close up or something. But there we go. That's Trojan. The sort of return of Red Dwarf after a little break, after a few years break, after Back to Earth. The launch of the Dave era proper. We have obviously our regular features on the show where we pick our favorite character, our funniest moments, and give it a mark out of 10. Matt, do you have a favorite character in this episode?
Well, I mean, I've already said that Rimmer's my favourite character generally anyway, and this is basically a him-centric episode, so I'm going to have to go with good old Iron Balls, Arnie J.
Excellent. Adam?
Throughout the episode, I was going to go for Rimmer, but then it would annoy him, but after Howard came in, man, Howard sold it to me. I'm going to give it to Howard Rimmer.
Nice.
I loved it. I think it's because obviously it's that thing again. It's new but familiar enough. Like there's just enough Arnie in there, but it felt very new as well. As I said, I think Mark Dexter, the actor, did a phenomenal job, and as you said, Matt, not an easy job to take on as well, I guess. So yeah, it's got to be Howard Rimmer for me. What about you, Phil?
I was going between Rimmer and actually Kat because of what we said earlier. He doesn't often get a lot. And I think he was used really well in this episode. So although there wasn't anything in particular, like one instance that I could go like, that's the reason why. I just think he was used really well in comparison to how he's been used a lot of the time. So for that reason, because we don't tend to give it to Kat very often, I want to give it to Kat just because of that, I think. So I'm going to give it to Kat.
Good on Kat, yeah.
Funniest moments. What was it can be as little as a single line or something happening in the background, or it can be a whole scene. Matt, what was your funniest bit of the episode?
This was quite difficult because as we were sort of talking through it, I kept sort of thinking about other things. Like, I mean, I did love that the scene with with Rimmer doing his revision. And there's also a bit that I quite liked when Howard comes onto the ship and Rimmer's introducing all of his crew. And he talks about, this is Crichton, our mechanoid who we found. And Howard's like, oh, gosh, you know what? So you gave him a new lease of life and all this sort of stuff. And he's like, no, we just scrubbed him up and gave him a hat. And I thought that's quite a good gag.
That was a great line.
That's a good line.
But the one for me, and I'll just bring it up on my phone, the gag that I liked, which is, I mean, I don't know what it says about me, my immaturity, was when Rimmer's just had his meltdown and they've just cleaned all the resentment out. And he refers to his brother, and Lister goes, oh, isn't he the one who painted your Todger with glow-in-the-dark paint? And then Rimmer replies with,
for 3 whole nights I could read Biggles Flies West under the bed sheets without needing a torch. When I lay on my back, I could have doubled as a lighthouse for really small ships.
That tickled me, so that is my favourite gag.
That's a great one too.
Good choice.
Adam?
I already mentioned it earlier, but it's got to be the recurring Moose Gag. That scene, just the way that was played out. And I actually think, I don't think we mentioned it, having a studio audience helped that joke so much. Because
we missed it so much in Back to Earth, didn't we? The studio audience.
I think that hurt Back to Earth so much. Like the fact there's no studio audience and like the vibe just doesn't feel right. But because there's a moment, I think it's when Kat does the joke, he instantly cuts in and says, oh yeah, it's Moose.
Yeah.
But then Chris Barry waits for the audience to stop that. But that adds, it's hard to describe, I guess, but having the studio audience for that gag just helped it so much. But yeah, I loved it. It was simple yet effective. So yeah, it's got to be the recurring Moose gag.
I had that one down as well. The Moose gag and everything, that was mine as well. It's just
Howard nearly clinched it for me with his you were an absolute twat. Like, again, don't know what that says about me, but that nearly got me. But I think the Moose gag was just a little better.
I did have another alternative, which was, I think it was the my other alternative was the choice one where he's going like, oh, you could be the better person. I can't remember what the exact line was now, but you could do the honourable thing and blah, 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 or you could be the snivelling, blah, blah, blah. And that was my other one, but I think the Moose one does clinch it over that.
I think what's nice about that Moose one as well is that you don't expect it to come back from the start of the episode. At the start of the episode, it feels quite inconsequential and just like, okay, this is fairly amusing. It's not the funniest thing ever. But then when they bring it back and then they make more of a meal of it, it really works.
This episode did a lot of that really well, keeping stuff kind of relevant and flowing through callbacks to stuff that they set up earlier. There wasn't anything that, because sometimes in Red Dwarf, it kind of feels almost like there's two stories stitched together. There's like what happens at the sketch at the beginning, and then there's the adventure. But here, and they kind of don't often, sometimes they don't always connect. But here, it felt like all the jokes that they had in those sketches at the beginning kind of came back in like the telephone and stuff like that all came back again. So the last thing we do is mark it out of 10 out of 10 scutters. How many scutters would you give this episode? Matthew, how many would you give them?
Ooh, I think I'm going to give it 7 scutters. I think it was a nice return to form for the series, just generally. And I think it's a good, strong episode. It's got nice ties to previous series and, you know, the continuity of the programme. And there's some good gags in there. And I think, yeah, a strong 7 is a good bit of dwarf fun.
Nice. Excellent. Adam?
I'm going to go a bit higher. I'm going to give this 8 out of 10 scutters. I think this is partly because the last proper Red Dwarf thing I've watched was Back to Earth. So this really helps sort of get the bad taste of that out of my mouth. Like you said, Matt, it feels like a return to form, like good old classic Red Dwarf, whilst also being new and fresh, new characters, following on the links. So just really strong start for Series 10, and I'm glad they started out this way. So long may that continue.
Yeah, I'm going to basically echo what you guys have said here. I'm also giving it 8, and that is, again, just because I think I was trying to work out whether or not I was being overly generous or not, because, as you just said, Adam, we've just come off of Back to Earth, which is the kind of, for me, the lowest point of the series. Yeah. And it's, so maybe I'm being overly generous because that's what it's followed. And even before that, we had Series 8, which, while has some good elements, it's one of the weaker series. So this kind of feels like a return to form, and it feels like, you know, the kind of humor and the kind of energy that we had in maybe Series 5 and 6 and that kind of era. So I'm really liking what it is, and I haven't seen this since 2012, so it's still a bit vague in my memory, even though I have seen it all before. So I'm looking forward to what the rest of the series has in store as well. So I'm hoping it keeps up. I hope I'm not. I think it is. I think it's not just that it's about the back of the bad stuff. I think it is worth it as well, because there is some really good humor in here, some great character stuff. And yeah, I really had a good time with this episode. So fingers crossed it continues.
Well, thank you for inviting me on for this one in particular, because I think I said at the start, it's not a series that I've revisited particularly often. I think this is probably only the 3rd time I've watched this episode. Oh, wow. So, you know,
you're gonna have to go through all of Series 10 now, Matt. Now that we've started.
I know. I was sort of thinking that after watching the first one. I was like, oh, I enjoyed this. I could go for a few more of these. So that was good.
Excellent. Well, thank you for coming on. Do you want to plug your stuff? What have you got? You've obviously got your own podcast.
Well, you can tune into the Review of Death podcast, which we do occasionally bring up Red Dwarf things, but it is a Doctor Who podcast. We usually just steal Red Dwarf gags, I think, and just put them into our things. That and Bottom, that seems to be our major ones. If it's a comedy from the 90s, it ends up in our podcast. But yeah,
make a drinking game out of that.
I know, yeah, we could, couldn't we? Yeah, oh dear, that'd be dangerous. So yeah, we've got the Review of Death podcast. It's a Doctor Who podcast, and once a fortnight on a Thursday, we talk about an episode of Doctor Who. We update people on Doctor Who news and just have a general chat about all things Doctor Who-y. And that's on Batman March on YouTube.
Lovely.
Yes, in your very swanky studio.
Oh, thank you.
Lovely studio you've got there. We've got studio envy. We want a studio like that one day.
I wish I was in the studio now, because it is so hot in this room. I miss the air conditioning.
Yes, I bet. And of course, you can catch us in our usual places online. Adam, where can they find you on the Tinternet?
Just Adam Martyn on YouTube, Martyn with the Y. You might think, why does he keep saying that? You'd be surprised. So Martyn with a Y, not with an I. And on Twitter, just Adam Martyn AMTV for all my ramblings here and there, I suppose. What about you, Phil?
Well, you can find this podcast does go up on my YouTube channel, which is just Philip Hawkins. Philip with one L. We always have to clarify how we spell our names.
We do.
And how do people spell your name, Matthew? Is there anything unusual? It's Matt with two T's, isn't it? Matt with two T's.
Matt with two T's. I mean, I met William Russell at a convention once, and I asked him to sign this thing, and I said, to Matthew. And he was like, is that with one T? And I said, no, two. And he went, 2 T's? I was like, yeah. And he looked at me incredulously. And then he turned to the person who was sat with him and was like, he wants 2 T's in his name. I was like, okay. But it's my surname. My surname's the one that gets all the trouble. Toffolo. No one gets that right. So.
It's a great surname, though.
Oh, thank you.
At least people don't need to know it to find your YouTube channel. So that's okay.
Yes, yeah.
That's all right. And yeah, you can find me on Twitter, which is @culturefilter. Filter spelt like my name. Filter. The podcast also has a Twitter account @AllDeadDavePod, and we have a merch store with some t-shirts and mugs and stuff if you want to buy those. Links in the description of the YouTube version of this. We'll be back for episode 2 of series 10 next week. So until then, thank you for listening and see you then. Goodbye.
See you later.
Bye.